Have you ever had your wallet stolen or your apartment broken into?
I've had my apartment broken into. Yep.
It felt like that. And it's a strange feeling when that happens. I've had my wallet, I've been robbed. It's like, it's more than, oh, what a pain, I'm gonna have to replace my TV or my credit card. It's a violation because it's not just cash, fungible stuff. It's, wait, that's mine. And so it felt really strangely personal. This is stuff that I've spent my entire adult life creating, and they just stole it and used it.
This is Rachel Vail. She's a book author, mostly of children's and YA books, actually 40 books. She learned that without her knowledge, without her consent, AI models had used her books to train on. They knew her books well. They knew her books very well. With the right prompt, she found the AI could spit out a new outline for a new Rachel Vail sequel.
There was an element of it that felt so trespassing and so violating that goes beyond even a monetary compensation. Because to me, it's not just they should pay, but they also have to ask permission. And they didn't ask, they just stole it.
Rachel is not the only writer who felt violated. She joined other members of the Authors Guild as a plaintiff against OpenAI. And there are now dozens of court cases involving AI and copyright, piracy allegations, and IP theft during model training. We'll be exploring all of that on The People's AI, presented by the Vana Foundation. I'm your host, Jeff Wilser, a longtime journalist and a host of the AI Summit at Consensus. And I'm proud to partner with Vana to bring you this season of The People's AI. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty and user ownership. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates. Learn more at vana.org. Okay, so these questions of IP theft and how our data can be used by AI companies, is that fair use? Should it be paid for? Are very far from settled. The debate rages on. But to get some clarity, let's set the stage by getting back to Rachel.
I fell in love with sentences when I was very young, and a good sentence and a good story are so important to me. So I kept going, and since then, I've published about more than 40 books. My books are all for teenagers, to adolescents, to kids, to little kids. One of the things I learned in playwriting is you want to concentrate in your writing on the mountaintop moments, the moment when everything changes. And I'm not someone who has lived a life where there are a lot of life and death decisions, except I did go to 7th and 8th grade, where everything feels like a life and death thing. And that's where I started with my career. Somebody can look at you funny and you just want to die. You feel like your life is ruined, or somebody looks at you in a different way and you're like, oh, what is this strange feeling I'm having? Oh my God, I think I might be in love with Tom or Tim. I don't know, whoever that is. I think he's my destiny. And so that's what I try to tap into, those feelings.
Now, for some wider context, Rachel, as mentioned, is a member of the Authors Guild. And years ago, they began warning their writers about something called pirate sites, which were a bit of foreshadowing of AI.
So they had been talking about pirate sites, which are, they call them like free library and stuff. It sounds innocuous, but there are companies that scan books that are in copyright and then allow people to have access to them, give it out, and they make their money on advertising. Advertisers, pay. So they make lots of money, but it's basically pirating copyrighted books. And you can imagine right away, like it takes only a second to go from that to realize, oh, that collapses the market for books. If everything is pirated, then there's nothing there's no value in the book. And copyright is in the Constitution. It's a bedrock value of our society. And it enables people to spend their lives being a writer, and it enables people to get paid for the work that they do as writers. And so there are these pirate sites, and the Authors Guild has been working for a long time to notify the authorities that this is happening. This is, it's robbery, it's stealing work. So when there are pirates, you try to get the law and the institutions to protect people and their work. So I had heard about these pirate sites. I knew that some of my books were on these pirate sites. And so I had been aware of that.
Pirate sites were one thing, but in 2023, Rachel received news that changed everything.
The new thing in 2023 was that there were these big corporations, big companies coming up, tech companies that were using the pirate sites and scooping up all of the books and training their new machines on it. And these new machines are AI, artificial intelligence, and large language model. And the way that they were making their machines work, they were training their machines on all of the world literature. Now, not all of the world literature is under copyright, but they were scooping up even all the copyrighted books and using them to train their machines, this multi-billion-dollar machine. And for the right to use our work, they were paying $0. And for permission to use our work, they were not asking. So the Authors Guild got wind of this and asked us, first the people involved in the Authors Guild and then the broader authors community, check and see, is this happening to you? And so I checked, and yes, indeed, my works had been stolen and scooped up and used to fuel these machines.
It was here that Rachel said it felt like her wallet was stolen, like she'd been violated, and that violation felt even deeper. And here I'll add a trigger warning for sensitive content.
I have also been a victim of sexual assault and sexual harassment. It felt like that too. Now, I've had lots of my books licensed for other use, for academic use, for use in testing materials, and use in other languages, for audiobooks, even for paperback. There's a licensing process. And I can't remember saying no to any of those things. And they pay a little fee, and we're going to use your book for this other use. And they pay a little money, but they have to ask first. And if for some reason I didn't want my book to be in French, well, that's up to me. I made it. I get to say. And similarly to if I don't want to kiss somebody, I get to say no. And kissing is lovely. I write about it all the time. But I also write about the right of a person to say yes or no. And that argument that they make, it would be very expensive if we had to contact all the authors and get permission and then pay them. That would cost us so much money, save the billionaires who are running these machines. And I'm like, yeah, like I drive my car up to see my parents very often. And gas is so expensive. So I think I won't pay for it anymore. I'll just take it because I can't run my machine without it. That's just a bonkers way of reasoning. It doesn't make any sense at all.
When did it hit you, Rachel, that to use a metaphor of your wallet being stolen or apartment broken into, like in my mind, it's that, but maybe if you're an artist, they didn't just steal your wallet, they maybe stole a painting that you had made and took it from your living room and then took it back to their home and used that painting to create their own painting and sold it on the market at a price undercutting your own, right?
Right. So then I can never sell my work again. And so the first thing is the pirating and the robbery of it. And then it completely destroys the market. So for instance, I've written some books in series. So there are a few different characters and It's one of the series is called The Friendship Ring. And that one, for example, was taken by one of these companies, and the series was continued in Spanish. So there are all these other books in the Friendship Ring series. There are 6 in that series. There are a few after that that say by Rachel Vail. And I did not write those.
Wow.
And they are not what I would have written, but they say by Rachel Vail. And then there are a bunch more in that series that don't even say by Rachel Vail, but they're the characters and they're the world that I created, that I spent my non-fungible time creating. And that's just one example. But like if I've written a few books in a series called Just in Case. And if AI wants to, kids write to me and say, I hope there'll be a 4th book in the Justin series. And I think about it. And I have written sequels when enough kids want it. But AI, the ChatGPT or whatever company, could put out 10 today. And they would be not as good, in my opinion. You're absolutely right that it destroys the market for authors to create books.
And this potential for the entire destruction of creative markets, of course, is why there is now a blizzard of lawsuits against these AI companies. That includes the New York Times and others suing OpenAI, where we interviewed the lead attorneys on this podcast a few episodes back. To get a little more clarity on the key legal questions, I spoke with Mark Lemley, a law professor at Stanford. He's the director of the Stanford program in law, science, and technology. He's taught IP law for over 30 years and has written papers on AI and the law. I first asked Mark for a lay of the land. What are the core questions and legal issues being discussed right now?
So in the United States, we've got over 50 lawsuits pending involving copyright and AI. Most of the early ones and the ones for which we have kind of resolution so far are targeted at the idea of training AI itself, right? So the theory is that training the AI, because it requires you to build a training data set of billions of different works, violates the copyrights in all of those works. And those cases, most of those cases are still pending, but we've got 2 decisions from 2 different courts in the Kadri versus Meta case and the Bartz versus Anthropic case, both of which said the act of training an AI is fair use under copyright law. That means, yes, it is an act of copyright infringement, but that act of copyright infringement is excused because it's done for a public benefit purpose or it doesn't cause economic harm.
For a layperson like me, can you explain a little more how to square that, how the idea that it could be a copyright infringement, but also fair use, and maybe give some other examples in the non-AI world where that is the case?
Sure, yeah. So copyright law recognizes that because we make almost everything anyone creates copyrightable, and copyright lasts, almost a century, that we'd run into trouble if we said anything you do with a copyrighted work is necessarily illegal. So we've got this doctrine of fair use that says we're going to consider whether the use you made of a work is permissible, either because it serves a public benefit, because it is transformative and allows you to create new works, or because it just doesn't actually do any economic harm to the interests of the copyright owner. So examples of things that have been held to be fair use in the past, parody. So I can take your song and make a song that starts out sounding like it, but actually makes fun of it. That's a copy, but it's not a copy we want to declare to be illegal because we think it's creating its own value. And then a little closer to the context of AI, the Google book search case. So Google came to Stanford, scanned the 10 million books in the Stanford library, put them into a giant database, but it used that database not to sell copies of the books in competition with the publishers, but to make them searchable, to give you sort of little snippets. And the court said that was fair use because you're building a new and valuable thing, this kind of searchable database of books, and you're not interfering with the market for the book itself because nobody's going to take the 4-line snippet instead of the book. And so fair use, you can't really say, oh, something is definitely a fair use. It depends on a kind of case-by-case analysis of several factors, whether I'm transforming it, whether I'm making something new, and how does it affect the market for the copyrighted work are probably the most important.
So that's the first bucket, the question of how the models were trained, and is it a copyright violation or fair use? And that brings us to bucket number 2.
So the second set of cases, which are a little more recent, but we're seeing more and more of late, are cases that don't say training is illegal, making this database that stays behind the scenes is illegal, but instead say, hey, your AI actually is generating output that is a copy of or is too similar to mine. So in the Disney case against Midjourney, for instance, you can get Midjourney to generate a pretty straight-on copy of Darth Vader, right? In some of the song lyrics cases, the AI will actually produce the lyrics of Stairway to Heaven or something of that nature. And here the argument is not the act of training the AI is itself illegal, but the particular things the AI can do are making copies that are shared with people, and that's illegal. And those cases, we don't have judgments in any of those cases yet, but those I think are going to be much harder to defend as a fair use because the AI is making something for a customer that competes directly with the image they might have gotten from somewhere else, right? Or a song lyric site that they might have gotten from a licensed source.
Is one possible scenario here that the net result of all of these 50 cases might be that the AI companies are free to train as they have, but the actual application, the output of these models can't be churning out creative works that look like copies or plagiarism of the original creators. Am I warm on that?
Yes. Yeah. I actually think that's the most likely outcome, right? So far, the cases that have decided fair use on training have said training itself is permissible. I think personally, that's the right decision. I wrote a paper back in 2020 before any of this stuff came around called Fair Learning, where I argued that if what AI is doing is training not in order to make copies of the work, but in order to figure out word relationships or kind of what a kitten looks like or all of these things, and it's producing non-infringing works, that's a valuable thing and the law ought to protect it. But if it's producing copies of Darth Vader, right, then we've got more of a problem. And so I think what's notable about that, if that's the way the law goes, is it's not an existential threat to the AI companies in a way that saying training is illegal would be. You know, if we said, you've trained on 2 billion works off of the web and every one of those is an act of infringement, with statutory damages, we're talking about potentially damages in the hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars, right? That's just not feasible to run a company. But I do think it is more likely that companies are going to be held to account, right, when their models generate things that aren't new works, but are copies of somebody else's works that appeared in the training data set.
And here I think about Rachel's arguments about a sense of violation, about a lack of consent. I asked Mark this directly.
What about the argument, Mark, that creators, writers, singers, what have you, they were never consulted about this? They were never asked if they were okay with their original works being used to train AI. When they wrote books years ago, it was not with the intent of training these models. So not only was there no consent, but there's also no compensation.
Yeah. And I think it's important to kind of try to distinguish compensation and consent, right? So if we say the law should require consent to train AI, I think we are effectively saying you can't train AI on a kind of broad base of content. So, you know, what we'll see is, I think, a bunch of people choose to opt out. Maybe we see some licensing deals with a few kind of large aggregators or big companies, right? But the result is that we get an image search engine that's trained on whatever shows up in the Shutterstock database because we got a license from Shutterstock, right? That might or might not be representative of what we actually want images to be trained on. So I think we probably get worse AI. And it's not obvious that copyright owners in that circumstance are going to benefit from that. I mean, I guess maybe they feel happier that they're not being used to train AI, but that doesn't mean I think that they get anything out of it, right? And logistically, it's likely to be a nightmare, right? So Europe is talking about something like this. You should have some sort of system or an opt-out system. But the reality of the situation is, there are so many copyrighted works out there. It's hard to imagine how you would manage that for successive generations of AI. We often don't know who the copyright owner is, right? Sometimes the artist is not actually the person who owns the copyright. And so the publisher might well say, yes, we'll do a deal and we'll get paid. The author says, hey, wait a minute, I didn't agree to this, but they don't actually have the rights. So I think consent is a real challenge. And if that's the rule, it basically becomes a rule that says you can't really do AI at the kind of broad scale of we want to train on everything. Now, compensation is a little trickier. So a number of people have talked about the possibility, well, all right, if you're going to train on my stuff, I should get paid for it. And that sounds intuitively fair, right? The companies are going to make money from it. Part of the challenge, I think, is that for many of the works we're talking about and for many of the AIs we're talking about, they train on such a broad range of things, and the individual contribution of any one work is so small that it's just not going to make sense. So take, for example, Stability AI, image generation company, so Stable Diffusion. The company's probably worth $1 billion. It trains on 2 billion images. Right. So even if we say we're going to take half of the value of the company and we're going to give it straight to the creators,
like 25 cents for
everybody gets 25 cents. Right. And I don't think when people are talking about, I want to be compensated for this, I don't think they have in mind, I'm going to get paid 25 cents. I do think there are markets and industries where compensation might be more feasible. So if you've got a big aggregator, right, a Shutterstock or something of that nature, and I can say, I'm going to sell 80 million photographs, that might be worth something that they could get paid for. If you've got concentrated industries and there aren't that many works you need to train on, so music might be an example here, where the big three music publishers might get a substantial chunk. And we've already seen some licensing deals get signed in those circumstances. But I think for the individual creator, individual artist, the idea that you're going to sort of draw some substantial revenue from training is probably not feasible.
No, there's been something that has been sort of bugging me and on my mind here. And here I'll peel back the curtain. I am a bit conflicted about something. I am both a podcast host on AI and also a book author. I've written 8 or 9 books. I've collaborated and ghostwritten several more. I love writing books, and I have a bias toward protecting book authors and my creative friends and colleagues. However, I can also appreciate the argument that, hey, should there be some leeway for machines learning through books in the same way that humans learn through books? And I have kind of a thought experiment that's a little wacky, but I pose to Mark.
If a super smart person wanted to write a book on archery and they read 100 books on archery and then write their own book on archery, they would be, yes, drawing from the principles they gleaned from reading 100 books on archery, but they would, and to your point earlier, I think it's hard to identify I have known nothing about archery, so it's a terrible example to use, but their understanding of what level of tension to pull the string back before firing the arrow, they probably got that from reading 37 of 100 books, but they're not sure where to attribute this to, right? So that's allowed. We're allowing a very smart human to read lots of books, and they write their own archery book, which would be competing with 100 books they wrote. That is legal, but how is an AI version of this not the same as that? And I guess you could argue, or I've heard argued by their lawyers, that's a question of scale. It's not a human reading 100 books. It's this world-class machine reading like millions or billions of books, and also the intent to put the other publisher effectively out of business. So how do you think about that kind of thought experiment?
Yeah, no, right. And I do think one of the things that's important to kind of keep in mind is, right, our goal in having copyright law is not just sort of pay people to create things, right? It's also to make sure that everybody else gets access to and can use those things, right? So we distinguish between ideas and expression. So I can control the particular way I phrase my discussion of archery, and you can't just copy that from me, but you're free to take the ideas you get from me, the kind of relationships and facts about the world, and use those, even if you're using them in competition with. And so here, I think one of the things that is toughest to get as a distinction in the law, but I do think is a critical distinction in the law, is when we talk about an effect on the market in copyright and fair use, we're talking about a substitution effect. I used AI's Darth Vader instead of kind of buying my own Darth Vader. We are not talking about economic harm that comes from competition from non-infringing works. So if I decide to create a new space opera with villains that turns out to sort of sell really well, and as a result, fewer people buy Star Wars, that's okay, even if I got the idea from Star Wars, right? Even if I kind of learned some of the concepts of what would work and what wouldn't from Star Wars, as long as the thing that I'm making at the end of the day isn't itself a copy of Star Wars or too similar to Star Wars. So I think that's one of the reasons why I think the law kind of probably will and should distinguish between I'm going to train on the basis of learning from your work and I'm going to generate output that's too similar to your work. We want to stop the latter, but we don't want to stop the former, just as we wouldn't if a human were trying to learn how to write a competing space opera.
Now, there's one very big variable that complicates all of this, or at least I find it complicated, and even something of a paradox. Many of the publishers are suing AI companies, but these same publishers have also signed licensing agreements with those same AI companies. Now, that actually I can sort of understand from the point of view of publishers. They're desperate for a lifeline for survival, honestly. But from the perspective of the big AI companies, it's a little more confusing. If their argument is that training is all fair use, then why would they even need these licensing deals at all? Is that even intellectually coherent? I take a stab at this question with Mark.
Can you say a little more about these licensing deals and how that impacts the legal questions? Because my layperson naive take here is it almost feels like the very fact that AI companies signing licensing deals to train on content is tacit acknowledgement that training without those deals is wrong.
Not a naive understanding at all. Actually, it turns out to be a really significant issue, right? So one of the problems with this market effect idea in fair use is there's some circularity to it. How have I lost money? I mean, one way I can lose money is you compete directly with me, right? You sell your Darth Vader instead of my Darth Vader. But another way courts have said you can lose money, and therefore that a use might be unfair, is it interferes with the established market for licensing the work. Everybody else is paying to get access to my work. You just decided to take it for free. You've deprived me of what I expected, which was licensing revenue. So the problem is that's circular, right? So if it's legal to train without paying any money, then there isn't really a licensing market loss because there isn't any licensing revenue. But if you're paying the licensing market, if you're paying licensing fees, then now there's a market harm, and so now maybe it should be illegal. And one of the things that's fascinating to me about this, what's going on right now, is these companies on the one hand are fighting for their lives, right? To say this is fair use, I shouldn't be subject to these gigantic fees. And at the same time, they're signing licensing deals that are creating the market that would make it probably not a fair use.
Is it effectively a hedging of bets, even though it's not not very intellectually coherent? It's like, well, we're going to play in both these lanes here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right. One possibility is the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. One possibility is I'm hedging my bets and I'm going to play both. Another possibility, and Jacob Nodi Victor and I have a kind of paper where we talk about this, is it may be a way in which you can kind of pull up the ladder. We trained all our stuff on the entire internet circa 2022. There was no licensing market then, but now that we've got money, now we can sign a set of licensing deals. the next startup that might come to threaten us now faces a situation where there's an established licensing market. So you can't train without paying. So we're imposing costs on the kind of next generation of people, on ourselves too, but maybe now that we're big, we can afford it. So there may be a way in which this actually kind of makes competition harder for the next generation of AI companies.
This suggests that the questions here are not just legal, but also really about business strategy. And it's also possible that all of this is not really a legal question at all, but maybe one of leverage and power. That's essentially where the CEO of Medium has landed. I spoke with Tony Stubblebine, the CEO of Medium, who has been a vocal critic of OpenAI and the like, but he has sort of a different takeaway and playbook. I first asked Tony to describe, in the simplest terms, what it was that big tech AI companies did that was wrong.
Can you, kind of give the blunt version of what OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, and that those companies, what did they do wrong in your view? What was the chief problem and crime?
I think the simplest way to frame it is this, what we call the 3 C's, which actually had been used in other places before we started using it. First is consent. Ask for permission. Allow us to say no. The other is credit. So, one of the hallmarks of the early AI is that it would tell you something, but not credit what it had trained on in order to tell you that. And that sort of generative AI was all based on like real people's work, but those people were never credited. And then the third is compensation, which could be money. But I think the Google search has shown that most of the internet would rather just get free traffic. Like we know what to do with free traffic, but some sort of compensation in there. And if you're not doing that, then I think the AI companies should expect to be cut off. And in fact, they have. There's been a retreat from the public internet that had allowed them to do this. And so I think they're not going to be able maybe to do it as much in the future. And then there's like tricky stuff where the AI crawlers that come to your sites, it's like sometimes they get blocked, but one of the big services that a lot of us use, Cloudflare, they allow us to, if we catch that it's a crawler, to just start poisoning the results with weird gobbledygook, right? And it's like, that's the kind of world where, that's why I say, get your popcorn. Like, if we don't come to a collaborative solution, it's going to be a fight.
To what extent, Tony, do you see this crime having already happened, and it's kind of the original sin of how many of these models have been trained? And to what extent is this still happening? Is it still an ongoing problem?
I mean, it's confusing, even to me. So I think it has happened, and we're behaving as if it's not a crime. Like, it's not a legal crime. It's a betrayal, and there'll be hurt feelings, and there'll be responses. But our basic position, or our operating position, is that it's not a crime against, it's not like an IP crime. It's not plagiarism. It's like, it would be considered fair use.
Now, this immediately caught my attention. The fair use argument, as Mark outlined earlier, is essentially the position of OpenAI and the rest. So is Medium conceding the point? I asked Tony this directly.
Sorry, which is to clarify, which is, I believe, different. It's a distinction between what the New York Times is alleging. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, right. So this surprised me. I actually thought originally, like, it's no use trying to fight this in the courts. We as a media industry will never prove that essentially doing a statistical analysis on your text isn't fair use, because it's always been fair use in every other kind of context. But I was in a very weird conversation with my lawyers, and it's like, one of the interesting things talking to lawyers at a big firm is that they see a lot more than we see. Like, they see everything in their clients see, but they can't tell you. So it's just kind of interesting to see like where they just like shut up. And the place where they shut up recently was that they said, well, no, it's not settled as fair use. And I was like, why not? What do you mean? They're like, we can't tell you. I was like, what do you mean? You know something. I know you know something. You're just behaving as if you know something. And so I think that, people are going to try this, in court. So what does that mean for like a Google or an OpenAI who, if it's proven that they've are guilty of copyright infringement, I don't even know how they stay in business. Like the scope of this copyright infringement is so massive. That's like to be determined. Yeah.
And reading between the lines is part of the thinking here. And I could be getting way over my skis here, but is that if we put all the eggs in the basket of letting the courts decide this, and there's a very plausible chance and perhaps even probable the courts say, it's fair use, that almost like cedes the entire argument. It cedes the entire decision to OpenAI. So what you're saying, instead of having a court be the primary defense, is say, hey, let's even like concede the point perhaps about fair use. So maybe it's legal, fine, but it's not right. It's a betrayal. And so you're kind of staking it on that turf. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's where we've staked our turf, is the right way to say it. And also, just to add on to what you said about fair use, there's more than one country in the world that gets to make that decision. So it's not just like, is it fair use in the US courts? Is it fair use in the European Union courts? And so I think, like, I would actually guess now that we're into it, that we're going to get some sort of mixed bag result, and that these companies are going to be forced to pay up somehow. But regardless, Medium's not a company that can force. Like it's sort of know your wheelhouse, right? Like pick a lane and fill it. Like, we're good at building a platform for people to write on. That's it. We're not good at litigation. We're not litigators, right? And so we just looked at this and said, well, where would we be good? And this is actually like something I always tell people at work when we're facing some kind of contractual dispute, is that there's always three forces at play that like kind of govern a relationship. One is the contract, the legal ease of it, right? But that's not the whole story. The other is reputation, and then the third is power. So in this case, between like us and an OpenAI, we can help articulate and frame the debate as a way of putting public pressure on these companies. And so we were very early, probably the first platform to say, this is bullshit, and here's why, and like, here, let's write the explainer on it, and here's what we should do, and just to move that conversation forward. So that's, if we don't believe we're going to win in courts, or don't believe we have kind of the lawyers on staff to win in the courts, then we do know how to behave in the public sphere, and we're going to do that. And then the other is what I said, power, right? So the example of poisoning the results or blocking the crawlers. That's a place where we do have power to prevent this from happening in the future. And I actually think that's a fairly effective path to go down, because if the media companies like us, if the platforms like us start picking winners and say, hey, we're only, like, imagine if every social media platform that you know of one day said, we're only going to work with Google and we're not going to work with OpenAI. OpenAI is out of business, right? Because the competitive landscape's not settled yet, right? So we do have power in that regard as well.
When I think about these questions of power, honestly, just as a human and a book author myself, I come back to writers like Rachel, who really just wants to write children's books and YA books and be paid fairly for her work. She never set out to wrestle with giant AI companies about power. And I feel like I owe Rachel the chance to respond to my goofy thought experiment of, shouldn't the AI be able to read as much books on archery just like a human, and then write its own book on archery just like a human would? So I share with her that same silly thought exercise. Also, as an aside, I don't know anything about archery. I don't care about archery. I have no idea why that was the first thing that popped into my head, but here we are.
That's one that I have struggled with too, because it feels at first like, well, that's true. And I'm sure putting all the books that I've read in my life through the machine of me has affected me. Anybody who reads a Hemingway book has to spend a month writing like Hemingway. So we put it through the machine of our...
A little longer than a month in my case,
right.
embarrassing.
Yeah. But there are some real differences. One thing is computers aren't human. And computers are not reading the books. They're not reading them. They're not thinking about them. We anthropomorphize computers all the time. I do. I am a children's book writer. I anthropomorphize chairs and couches and animals, and I see the life force in everything when I call my husband, "Hey, sweet," and sometimes Siri will say, "Sexily." Mm-hmm. And I say, "Not you. I'm not talking to you."
Right.
So I get it, the anthropomorphization of the computer, but it is not a consciousness. It is not a human. So it is a completely different thing that they're doing than what we're doing. They're not reading, they're not thinking, they're ingesting. And you can read your 20 books on archery and then come up with your own, and then do archery and think about archery and what archery means to you. And that gets mixed with your experience of life generally. And maybe you did it in camp and it brings up that feeling, or with your dad and that brings up a different feeling, or, so you have all of that. But what a computer is doing is a difference in kind, because they're not reading it and putting it in the context of their life, because they don't have a life. But it's also a difference in scale, which makes it a difference in kind. You could take the month, if you're a fast reader, and read those 20 books on archery. The computer could take 20 minutes and ingest those 20 books on archery. And the computer can't then filter it through a consciousness, because it doesn't have consciousness, to create its own thing. What it's doing is then predicting words based on the words that the computer ingested, the sentences that it already did. And the difference in kind is also that when the computer ingests those 20 books on archery, it could then put out 20 more books on archery and destroy the market for the person who is a master archer, who has devoted his life to archery, or you who have now gotten very interested in archery and done all the research on these different books and had the lived experience of dealing with that. There's no market for it anymore. So on the other side, the side that I'm not as connected with, because I have the privilege of, my part is the creative part, not the business part. But if there is no market for it, then we will not hear ever again from a new archer, a new person who comes up with, from a different, maybe a different culture, and comes up with a different archery kind of book, because the computer can put out 30 of those today.
I am struck by Rachel's response, and it feels like she could have easily been a good lawyer or philosopher in another life. But even that question of career now feels fraught. I'm wondering how Rachel is now thinking about her future career in this world of AI, or the careers of her colleagues, the industry at large.
It feels very scary. And when I talk to my colleagues, other writers, people are scared. The publishing world is shrinking and shrinking. It's already hard. And on one hand, does the world need any more books? Like, if the computer is going to spit out another 100 books in the style of Rachel Vail, like, the world doesn't need any more Rachel Vail books. But if I've got them, if they go out and they touch somebody, great. I will never have time in my lifetime to read all the books that I would love. So it's not that the world needs more books, but the world does need to hear from us. And I look at my kids and their friends who are graduating from college and thinking about what to do. And some of them ask me about being a writer, being a novelist, being a playwright, or working in publishing. And it's very hard for me. This is horrifying, but it's very hard for me to recommend to them that they do this, because I don't know, if they're 23 years old, will there be a business for them to be in? But we need their voices. We need to hear what the next generation and the one after that, how they're wrestling with the big questions of life and death, and should I keep a secret?
Now, this is less about the law or anything, but one additional concern I have is that AI will eventually get really, really good at writing stories and writing books. Just as, remember a few years ago, it went viral when they would try to have these like AI videos of pizza. They were so bad and like horrifying. Everyone laughed, ha ha ha. Isn't AI bad at making videos? That was a couple of years ago. Guess what? AI is really good now at videos. And I suspect it will soon get really, really good at writing books and compelling novels and that do not even feel derivative. They might actually feel new. So what if it gets so good that we can't tell the difference? Or what if we're just living in this ocean of synthetic AI creations and we're kind of hunting for the human spark? What if everything is just AI, AI, AI? I share that concern and ask Rachel's her thoughts.
I completely agree. Completely agree. And we're, by saying, all right, whatever, we're buying into a kleptocracy. And if we just build everything on stolen goods, even if they then pay a fee and pay a fine or whatever, it's built on stealing. And it's just machine driven and there's no place for the human spark, as you said. That's horrifying to me. And there's nothing new. It seems new because they're recombining it in new ways, but people have said Shakespeare invented the human. Before Shakespeare, there wasn't Shakespeare to copy. There weren't the Shakespearean themes. The idea of the individual making choices in the world was not a popular thing. Struggling with the very human emotions. My mom is quite ill right now. She had a stroke last year. And the other day, she said, and she's not a Shakespeare scholar at all, but she was in despair. And she said, never, 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 never. Now, that is a direct quote from the end of King Lear. That is one of the most devastating moments in King Lear when he is saying his daughter Cordelia will never be with him again. Never, 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 never. It's pentameter, but it's trochaic pentameter instead of iambic pentameter. It's like bump, bump, bump. It has the rhythm of a heartbeat. And my mom was saying it. And it was like, oh, she's not quoting Shakespeare. Shakespeare was quoting her. It was this incredibly deep human thing that I don't think an AI would come up with that if Shakespeare hadn't first. But my mom wasn't quoting him. She was feeling that deep depth of human despair. And if we don't have human invention anymore, what are we doing? Like, are we just going to have the machines lift the weights for us and create our art for us and then read it and summarize it for us? And then the machine can read the summary for us. What are we doing? What are we saving ourselves for? The poet who says, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? Are you not going to engage? Are you not going to engage with a human consciousness? Are you not going to sing and dance poorly and write and read, but go mano a mano with other human thinkers? What are we doing? Are we just gonna eat and poop? Or are we gonna get the machines to do all that for us too?
Well, there you have it. Thank you again to our guest, children's book author Rachel Vail, Stanford law professor Mark Lemley, and Medium CEO Tony Stubblebine. And thank you again to my partner, the Vana Foundation. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty and user ownership. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates. Learn more at vana.org. Thank you to Bradford Craig for our sound design and music. Thank you to Kate Morgan for research and producing. And thank you to Jasper Chua for creating our videos on YouTube. If this is your first time in People's AI, please subscribe, share it on social, send to a friend. Thanks again, and see you next time.